Is there a way for corporate strategy teams to make better decisions across the board? In an unpredictable world, how can they determine the quality of decisions already made? A new book, co-written by INSEAD professor Phanish Puranam, is designed to help leaders at multi-business firms do better strategy and engage more knowledgeably with professional advisors. He joins me now on INSEAD Knowledge. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Your new book, here it is, Corporate Strategy, Tools for Analysis and Decision Making, makes a distinction between corporate strategy and competitive strategy. Can you explain that?
Competitive strategy is all about how a business competes. So the key issues tend to be around identifying the forces of competition that act on this business and the internal resources and capabilities that help the business counter these forces and make a profit. But what happens as companies get larger is they very rarely remain single businesses. They become portfolios of businesses. And now the strategic problem migrates upwards from beyond thinking about competition and success in a single line of business to thinking about the interactions in the portfolio. So whereas in business strategy, the goal is to create what we call competitive advantage, in corporate strategy, because you're thinking about the whole portfolio, the goal is to create corporate advantage, which is to create value over and above what these businesses would have generated when they were owned separately by owning them together. So that's the fundamental distinction.
So in your view, what are the key features of an effective corporate strategy decision-making process?
So in the book that Bart Vaniste and I wrote, we tend to break this down into two separate pillars. So on the one hand, there is the structure of the decision, which has to do with clarity in looking at all alternatives. One of the biggest issues in corporate strategy, in our view, is people tend to make decisions without looking through the whole menu of possibilities. They tend very early on to fixate on a particular issue. So what the book does is provide some templates and frameworks to think through in a logical manner all the different alternatives that can arise when you're making a corporate strategic decision. So that's the structure part. A separate pillar has to do with the process of how one comes up with the decision. And now we're talking really about engaging enough people in the organization, extracting all the information needed, and of course making sure the decision is seen as being fair. This is equally important because ultimately these decisions have to be implemented by many people who weren't part of the original decision making. So both the structure and the process of decision making, in our view, are critical in corporate strategy.
And you talk a lot about the importance of not being influenced by one particular team or advisor's agenda. Can you expand on that?
Corporate strategy being as complex as it is, it's very common for companies to hire armies of consultants and investment bankers and advisors. And these guys have a lot of specialist expertise, so it's very valuable that the kind of insight they bring to the table. However, what often happens is that they have their own agendas in terms of what they would like the company to pursue. So the analogy I often give is that to a magician doing a card trick who says, pick any card, but you know there's a card they want you to pick. And unless the CEO or the top management team is themselves sophisticated enough to understand all the alternatives and the roads not taken, they could easily be led down a path which is not the best one for them.
And so in the corporate decision-making process, in a practical sense, how could they avoid being too influenced by, one team and their own incentives to do a deal?
Suppose we're thinking of entering a new business. We could tell one team that the cost of making this entry when you should not have is very large, and the other team is told exactly the opposite. The cost of not entering when you should have is very large. So that's the error of omission. So if you have different teams looking at the same problem, but with very different costs of errors of commission and omission, we believe they will unearth different kinds of information and they will make different kinds of arguments. Not necessarily the case that either is right, but having all the information on the table makes for a better decision.
And you also mentioned that the key corresponding element to that diversity of opinion is also clarity of language.
This is very true. I think people underestimate the value of strategy frameworks as a language, over and above their capacity to tell us the right answer, which to be honest in many cases is not guaranteed. It's actually a common language within which a rational discourse can take place between different people looking at the same problem. So in part, our frameworks are trying to provide such a common language for corporate strategy.
And are you saying that your frameworks will always have the right answer?
Unfortunately, there are no rules for riches. If we know one thing about strategy, we know there are no magic bullets, there are no guaranteed right answers. But certainly there are worse answers and there are better answers. And I think what our frameworks are trying to do is move people in the direction of making better decisions, not guaranteeing the right one every time.
Thanks so much. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.